So good afternoon, and thanks for joining us today. On behalf of the United States Embassy in Santo Domingo, I am pleased to welcome you to the fourth webinar in our virtual higher education series. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Joshua de la Cruz, Emerging Voices Specialist at the U.S. Embassy in Santo Domingo. It is a pleasure to be here with all of you to explore TESOL, pedagogic methods and best practices. Promoting access to high quality education is one of our key priorities at the Embassy. I am very happy that Dr. Rebecca Blankenship, Associate Professor and Director of TESOL Programs in the Elementary Education Department at Florida A&M University, the University's College of Education, is able to be here with us and share best practices within TESOL methodology that have been implemented to support language learners at educational institutions. Thanks also to IVLP alumna and Teacher Development Center Coordinator, Karlans Camacho she is at Universidad Dominico Americana, who is serving as the moderator for today's discussion. Thank you again, Dr. Blankenship, for sharing your time and your experience with us today. I'm excited to see the opportunities that arise from this series of virtual webinars. Thank you all again. Estamos unidos.
Hi. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today in this session. We're more than welcome to have you with us. Thank you, Joshua, for those words as well. So now we would like to present our guest of honor. Dr. Rebecca Blankenship is an Associate Professor and Director of TESOL Programs in the Elementary Education Department at Florida A&M University's College of Education. Dr. Blankenship has over 16 years of public school teaching experience in both state of Tennessee and Florida. She has earned her PhD from the University of South Florida in the second language acquisition area and instructional technology. Dr. Blankenship's research interests include the development of virtual training environments for pre-service teachers, the digital agency and literacy development of pre-service teachers and university faculty, and the effects of politics and social media on the teaching profession. She has committed herself through her university teaching, supervision of interns, and faculty service to provide the most salient experiences for pre-service teachers, educators, particularly those representing marginalized populations, to ensure they're well prepared to enter the teaching profession. Her list of accomplishments and publications, in addition to her university, state, national, and international service, demonstrates her ongoing commitment to the preparation of future minority teacher corps. So with no further ado, it's my honor to present to you and to introduce you to Rebecca Blankenship. Good afternoon, Doctor. How are you? Thank you very much. Doctor, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
Great. It's an honor to have you. Please, the floor is yours.
Well, it is an honor and a privilege to present to you all today. Es mi placer estar aquí con todos ustedes y esperamos que gozamos esta presentación hoy día. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and share my screen so that you have an idea. But I taught high school Spanish, by the way, for 16 years and studied in Madrid. And so, but I will do my presentation today in English since that is what we are going to be discussing today. Let me go ahead. Give me just one moment. Okay, so the focus of our presentation today is going to be a survey of pedagogic methods and best practices for teaching students whose first language is other than English. Our presentation overview, just to give you an idea of what we're going to be discussing. We're going to be discussing what drives us in terms of legislation in the state of Florida, the requirements of our school teachers, our public school teachers, and our university professors in terms of working with English language learners. We are governed by a doctrine called the Florida Consent Decree, and I'll talk about a little bit more about that, the history of that briefly in just a moment. So I'm going to discuss how we identify our English language learners, the programming services that we offer to them, and then how we evaluate and ultimately place them in appropriate programming. I'm going to talk about the difference between ESOL and English as a foreign language. Sometimes the two terms are used interchangeably, and they do have similar characteristics, but they do mean something a little bit different. I'm going to talk about the training requirements for our, like I said, for our school teachers in public schools and our administrative personnel and guidance counselors. And then I'm also going to talk about the university training requirements that we have for our faculty and staff teaching in our College of Education Educator Preparation Program. I'll also talk about the standards that we are required to follow as teachers of English language learners to ensure that our ELLs are not only progressing linguistically, but they're also progressing cognitively as well. I will discuss the program that we actually offer at FAMU. It is an infusion program, but there's also another program that some state universities and private universities in Florida use, which is called an ESOL standalone program, and I'll discuss that in just a bit. And then what I think really one of the most important things for us to talk about today is the best instructional practices in working with our English language learners. I think this is particularly critical right now during the COVID-19 pandemic, particularly since March when we went into quarantine. We as educators have seen quite a drastic change in not only our English-speaking students, but we have seen some severe issues with our ELLs. And then I'm going to talk about some things that we can offer you as teaching faculty, some new and exciting programs that we are looking forward to implementing in the spring of 2021 at FAMU that we hope you will join us and be a part of. So the Florida Consent Decree was enacted in 1990, and basically what a consent decree is an agreement between litigating parties where one party agrees to certain stipulations so that they are not required to pay some sort of penalty to the party that has initiated a lawsuit. In this case, it was several Latino parties in the state of Florida that after we had a significant immigration of Spanish speakers in the 1980s, school teachers and administrators were reporting they were simply not equipped to deal with students whose first language was other than English, and in this case particularly Spanish speakers. And so what the state of Florida decided to do to mitigate this circumstance was to create a very comprehensive programming structure that all school districts follow according to the needs of the English language learners in their districts. And the reason that there is an overarching programming that we follow is because every district in the state of Florida has different levels of ELLs and they have different concentrations of ELLs. And so as long as they are following this guiding structure, they call it an LEP or a limited English proficiency plan, they are allowed to adjust that accordingly. And they also, at the end of every year, they do a review of how their ELLs have progressed, hopefully, and if they have regressed, then they look at making changes to instructional personnel, their training, and they look at making curricular changes as well. So you see there's 6 sections. The first thing we do is we identify and we place our ELLs in appropriate programming. We use a test called WIDA Access 2.0, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. The section 2 and 3 are very important for our English language learners to ensure that they have not only equal access to their content programming, but they also have equal access to all other programming. So if they want to be a cheerleader, if they want to be on the dance team, if they want to participate in athletics, if they want to go on a school field trip, we have to ensure that they have the appropriate language support to be able to do that. Section 4 is probably the most important part of the Florida Consent Decree, and that involves our personnel and the levels of training that they are required to receive. In Section 5 and 6, this is how we monitor our ELLs. We use the FSA testing, standardized testing, and we particularly focus on reading and math and science when it comes to how our ELLs are progressing in the state. And we make adjustments accordingly. And then at the end of every year, we generate outcome measures. And like I said, we make adjustments to our programming accordingly. And so just very briefly, just the difference between ESOL and EFL. So ESOL, the acronym, as you know, is English for Speakers of Other Languages. And this typically is used when we're talking about K through 12 learners. And the reason that we use this particular acronym is because we are really focused on two things: their basic interpersonal developing their basic interpersonal communication skill, or their BICS, and their cognitive academic language proficiency, or their CALP. And in terms of ESOL programming in our districts, we are guided specifically by that Florida consent decree and legislative requirements. And the federal district court that oversees the decree does an annual review to ensure that we indeed are following the metric as required. And when you're talking about ESOL, it's typically more directed resources at the school level. And you get a lot of district support as soon as an ELL is identified and entered into our programming. EFL, English as a Foreign Language, is typically associated with older learners, more secondary education, college courses, online courses, community college, university, English programs, English support programs at universities. And primarily the focus of this is really the basic interpersonal communication skill, that language skill, those discrete grammar skills, to ensure that our ELLs at the university level are achieving the score that they need on the TOEFL or the IELTS, so that they can continue in their education at the university level. So the training requirements. So that's the fourth category of the consent decree. And for me, it's the most important, because our school teachers, our guidance counselors, our school administrators, they are on the front lines of dealing and working with our English language learners on a daily basis, whether that was face-to-face before COVID-19, or whether that is continuing as we make adjustments to how our classrooms are going to look moving forward, whether that's hybrid, virtual, or how that's going to play out in the next few weeks. So the category 1 identified under the consent decree, they are required to have the most level of training. These are our elementary education, K through 6 teachers, and our English and English language arts teachers. They are actually required to have an ESOL endorsement on their teaching certificate. And they can get at that two ways. They can either take it as undergraduate courses, or they can take the equivalent of in-service hours. And you can see the in-service hours that they have to take is quite substantial. So many of these teachers tend to go the route of taking college course credit so that they can get that taken care of. And there is also in their state licensing test, about now, a quarter of that state licensing test involves ESOL questions. And so you can see that the state puts very heavy emphasis on ensuring that our teachers can work with English language learners in an effective way. And the reason they have the most level of training is because typically our ELLs that come into the state, their first contact is either in elementary school, or when they get to secondary, everyone is required to take an English course. And so that's where that plays in. That's why they have to have the most level of training. Our category 2, those are our content area teachers, math, science, social studies, computer literacy. Now, they are not required to have an endorsement on their certificate. Categories 2, 3, and 4, it's just a compliance. At the beginning of every year, the school district comes in and they ensure that all instructional personnel that either need the endorsement or the compliance are within state regulations. So category 2, you can see that the equivalency is less. Category 3, those are our elective teachers, our physical education, our media specialists, and then category 4 are our school administrators and guidance counselors. And our program at FAMU our coursework is specifically designed to address the needs, the instructional or administrative needs of each of these categories of personnel. And at any time, if you have any questions, if our moderator, I would like this to be as interactive as possible. If our moderator has any questions and would like to step in and ask those, by all means, please go ahead and do that. So we have two types of programming in the state of Florida in our educator preparation programs in our colleges of education. One is an ESOL standalone program, and that program involves teaching the 5 different domains in our state standards for teaching English language learners, and they're taught in 5 separate courses. What we've done at FAMU, which I think is really a lovely program, is it's actually, instead of taking the 5 standalone courses where you may not necessarily get to touch on the specific content area that you want to eventually teach, in an ESOL-Infused program, it's built into your content area and your methodology courses. And so whether you're teaching elementary, whether you're going to be teaching reading, whether you're going to be teaching social studies, whichever faculty member is teaching that particular course, they have been trained as to how to assist our future educators to be able to make modifications and adjustments to their lesson plans and their teaching style, instructional style and instructional strategies, their classroom management, to be able to facilitate the BICS and CALP, the interpersonal communication skills and academic language proficiency of the ELLs with whom they are working. So the training requirements of our university faculty and staff that actually teach in our ESOL-Infused program. And our infusion program, our elementary education program, is completely infused. That means that all courses in elementary education have the infusion component, and they have to demonstrate competency across the different domains, the 5 different domains. And in our secondary program, right now we are primarily focusing on our math, science, and social studies courses. However, in the coming year, we anticipate a fully infused program by the end of 2021, meaning that all courses in the College of Education will be ESOL-Infused because of the extreme importance and emphasis that we are putting on in our college for working with students from diverse language and cultural backgrounds. So for our university faculty, they're required to complete 45 hours of training. It is self-paced, it's online, and they work through 5 different modules that involve the following: methods of teaching ESOL, curriculum development, assessment, cross-cultural communication and understanding, and applied linguistics. So basically the mechanics of the English language. And this 45 hours includes a combination of the following. It includes webinars through different professional organizations that deal with English language learners, simulated training, which we are very excited to talk about, and our Director of P20 Partnerships and Field Clinical Placements is actually on this call with us, Ms. Tamesia Shelton, and she will be directing our simulated training program, Immersion, in the fall 2020. If you're not familiar with Immersion, it is a San Francisco-based company. It used to be called Teach Live. And Immersion is an avatar-based program that can be used with synchronous simulations or asynchronous simulations, where you interact with an avatar, and on the other side of that avatar is an actor. And that actor has been given a script to follow, and as the teacher or the university faculty is posing a question, or they're teaching a class, or they're giving a resource or what have you, that avatar is able, that actor is able to manipulate that avatar to be able to respond in real time or asynchronously to what that particular teacher is doing, which is really great for us now that we are no longer able to do our field experiences because of COVID. On-site observations, again, because of COVID, we're not able to do that. But prior to COVID, there was a 21-hour minimum contact requirement with English language learners working with schools and cooperating teachers. And another thing you may be interested in as well is our ESOL-Infused program actually distributes digital badges for when our students get done completing their coursework and the modules within that course, so that inside of their e-portfolio, when they go to apply for a job or promotion, their administrator can see, these are the discrete skills that this particular teacher has been able to acquire through their coursework. And I just briefly talked about our field experiences. Our field experiences, like I said, are now going to be converted to virtual field experiences using Immersion. But in the past, as noted, it was 21 hours, well, at least for our program, was 21 hours across 7 weeks, 3 hours a week working with an ELL, or sometimes more than one ELL. And the reason that the field experiences are super important, other than just getting the practical real world experience of working with an ELL, is because of the level of ELLs that we now have in our classrooms, and due to the fact that a lot of school districts in the state of Florida, we used to have separate pull-out programs for our English language learners, where students who were ELLs were pulled even into a different part of the school, and they were instructed by an ESOL director during the day. Well, due to budgetary requirements, in addition to the fact that we have so many ELLs in our state now that are either born in the United States and speak English as their second language or have immigrated into the United States, the state of Florida said we have to have our classroom teachers and our administrators trained to be able to teach these students in an inclusive classroom where they are directly interacting with other students rather than separating them, which can actually deter from their progression, their communicative and cognitive progression. And so many of our school districts have gotten away to having ESOL directors and ESOL standalone programs. It's now the responsibility of as it should be. It's the responsibility of the classroom teacher to be able to make the appropriate modifications and accommodations that our ELLs need. Now, a couple of, like I just talked about the fact that we don't have as many of those pull-out ESOL programs as we used to, given our new training standards. But we do have several school districts, and again, it just depends on the amount of ELLs that they have in their particular district. They look at a couple of options. Option one, they offer dual language programs. A lot of our school districts in the southern state of Florida, where we have very heavy concentrations of English language learners, they tend to opt for a completely matriculated K through 12 dual language program, meaning that our English language speakers and our non-native English language speakers simultaneously learn both languages so that by the time that they graduate from high school, they are completely fluent in both. And so those programs, it's a half and half program, and every program looks a little different. So you typically have 2 certified teachers in the classroom, one who's teaching in English and one who's teaching in the second language. And in this case, many cases, that is Spanish. And so, like I said, the models vary. Some days it could be they teach half the day in Spanish, half the day in English. The next day they reverse that. Or it could be 2 days on, 2 days off. It just totally depends on what the particular school and school district has agreed to do. The second option is bilingual programming. And those can be additive bilingual programs, or they can be subtractive bilingual programs, which we tend to get away from the subtractive bilingual programs because we want our non-native speakers of English to continue to progress linguistically and in their cognitive ability and their literacy skills in that second language as well. So we tend to, when we talk about bilingual programs, we look at that to be more of an additive program rather than a subtractive program. There's usually a classroom teacher and then a paraprofessional that assists with the ELLs, and the objective is to get the student as fluent in English as quickly as possible. This is typically a fully integrated program, and they don't usually offer the pull-out services that they do for other programming. So, any questions at this point that I can answer, Karlans? Do we have anything from our participants?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Blankenship. Here we have one about the immersion simulation. So our participants would like to know, how effective is the immersion simulation system in replacing or supporting a student's learning in the programs? And how do you keep the students engaged in this innovative process?
That is a great question. Immersion is part of a suite of new avatar, like I said, avatar and simulated based programs. And I think if we can say there's something positive that has come out of the COVID crisis, we can say that our students now even more than before are really engaged in using technology, and they want to use it to better themselves as professionals. And they are really leaning on us as their university faculty, knowing that they're not going to be able to go into the physical classroom. They are really working with us and leaning in to this whole process of using something that is simulated based. So when they go into the first thing we do is we don't just throw them in to the simulation and say, here's your avatar, here's the top process. They have practice sessions that they do with each other. They get peer feedback from each other, and they get feedback from me or their other instructors. There's time to stop and reflect on this worked, this didn't necessarily work. Why don't you go back in and try this with this particular avatar to see if you can, do what you need to accomplish. So it's not something that's just, it's a static program and we just put them in there and expect them to be able to interact. It is a very structured and detailed program. If Ms. Shelton is still on the call, if one of you could unmute her and let her talk just a little bit about immersion, that would be outstanding.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, Ms. Shelton, how are you?
I'm fine. Thank you so much, Dr. Blankenship, and what a wonderful presentation thus far. Briefly on the immersion piece, like Dr. Blankenship stated, that's a simulated avatar software that we will be using beginning with the fall 2020 semester. We'll actually be piloting it for Florida A&M University, and we're very excited about it. What it's going to do is give our students that real world simulation without being in the classroom setting exposed to the COVID-19. And we were looking for different ways to keep our students engaged. And I wanted to make sure that they had meaningful field experiences, even though they can't actually go into the physical classrooms. In addition to the immersion simulated software, one of the things I'm finalizing next week for the TESOL students that Dr. Blankenship teach is that they can do virtual field experiences with one of our partnership schools in the district. So I'm very excited about that. So in addition to the immersion piece, they'll also still be able to work virtually with ELL students in the classroom. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Shelton. We really appreciate that explanation. The other thing that we are also looking at doing, we've had discussion with this, Ms. Shelton is very instrumental in really facilitating our field experiences and making sure that they are salient for our students, particularly since they will be having to do them virtually, is there's another type of technology that we are considering purchasing as well. It's called Pekin technology using Swivel. And Swivel, it's S-W-I-V-L. And Swivel actually is a robotic device that has a camera lens on it. And the teacher in the classroom wears an infrared sensor. And that camera is on rollers, and it will actually follow the teacher around the classroom, so that if we want to do what's called peek-in, we can actually access the camera on our end and be able to watch in real time what's going on in that particular classroom, working with English language learners or working with any students. And we have on our campus, it's called a developmental research school, which is our lab school. And so what we are doing is looking at piloting that either in the fall or the spring of 2020 with some of our elementary teachers who tend to have more ELLs than our secondary grades do. And so we're looking at using that technology as well.
Elementary. Oh,
let me go back. Sorry about that.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Blankenship. We would like to encourage our participants to use the chat box to drop out your comments or any questions that you have for Dr. Blankenship, and we will be interacting with her as she continues with her presentation. So thank you very much. Go back to you.
Thank you. Let me move to where I was. There we go. Sorry about that. Okay, applying the best practices in working with our English language learners in the classroom, I think is one of the most important things that we can really discuss today. At the end of this presentation, when we open it up to even more questions and interaction, I have a few resources that I can share with you, but I want to encourage you, and my contact information will be at the end of this presentation as well. And I really encourage you to reach out to us at FAMU so that we can assist you in providing training for your teachers and looking at programming at your university levels to ensure that when you are learning the methodologies of teaching English as a second or foreign language, that you are applying the best practices for the 21st century classroom. So some best practices that we can do when we're supporting our ELLs. I think probably one of the most important things for me when I am working with my pre-service teacher candidates and my graduate students who are school administrators and guidance counselors is, aside from teaching just the mechanics of English and teaching your particular content area, I really cannot emphasize enough, particularly in today's diverse classroom, the responsibility of every educator to ensure a safe and culturally responsive environment for all of our students, but particularly for our English language learners. I think this is no more important than the world that we live in today. We see so many times in the state of Florida where we have students that are immigrating from countries where children have seen things that children should never have to see, where families have been broken up, where there is a threat of a family being removed from the country and sent back to a native country that they may not even know. And so since we see our students more than a lot of times their parents see them during the week, it is so very important that we are understanding that student's background and where that student is coming from as our first priority. Our second priority would be obviously to get them fluent in English and get them learning in the classroom. But if you aren't intentionally planning to ensure that you have a safe learning environment for all of your students where they feel like that they are walking with you and you're not just some object at the front of the classroom that's giving them worksheets to do or telling them to do an activity, but you're actually guiding them through their learning journey and you're working in lockstep with them and you're doing it in an empathetic and compassionate and culturally sensitive way, then you are going to create a classroom where students feel like that they can take risks in the language, and that because they can take that risk and they trust you in the classroom and they get the sense that you understand where they're coming from, then it's going to go a long way in helping them acquire English and also helping them acquire the content that you intend to teach. We call this the affective filter. It's a socio-emotional state where if you have a high affective filter, you don't trust the person that's teaching the class. You don't trust the person that the instructions that they're going to give you one day are going to be the same instructions that they're going to give you the next day. I always encourage my classroom teachers that when you step into that classroom, of course, we all have so many things going on in our lives right now, whether we're with our students face-to-face in the fall or whether we're with them virtually. We all have our different things that are going on, but when you step into that classroom, your first priority are those students. And it is really important that whatever sort of day that you're having, or you had a bad evening the night before, that you check that at the door, or in this case, you check it out before you get on Zoom, so that your students know that and recognize that you are there for them. And as Karlans noted in my introduction, I am very committed to ensuring that our next generation of teachers that go into our classrooms actually represent the students that they're teaching. we still in the United States are top heavy in terms of the look of our classroom teachers. And many of the classroom teachers that you still see today are young, female, and white. And that's not to say that you can't necessarily associate with your students or understand your students in the classroom who may be of a cultural heritage different than yours. But when you see a face in a classroom, whether it's a Latina face or a Latino face, or if it's an African-American face, or it's an Indian face, or it's a Native American face, you know that that person is coming from a place that they truly understand you. And so that's one of the reasons at Florida A&M that we are dedicated to really diversifying. And we have done, our president has done such an amazing job in recruiting. Even though we are a historically Black college and university, he has done an amazing job in recruiting a lot of students to our university now that represent a multitude of linguistic and cultural backgrounds. And in the College of Education, we are doing the same right now. Our next generation of teachers really needs to mirror the students that they're going to be teaching in their classes. So when you're talking about other effective best practices, you really want to emphasize productive language. So when you're creating an activity or you're designing an assessment, you want to make sure that it's actually speaking to the product that you want the student to produce. So in other words, if you're teaching a math lesson and it's on word problems, you don't want to give an assessment that is on long division that doesn't have anything to do with the lesson that you taught. And so one of the things that we emphasize is always pre-teaching vocabulary and doing some introduction to content before you really get into it, so the students have an idea of what it is that they're expected to learn at the end of your lesson. Typically what we see is the basic interpersonal communication skill, or BICS as the acronym is. BICS typically, as we know as language teachers, tends to develop much faster than the cognitive ability. And so one of the reasons that we emphasize so much training of our teachers in our schools and our administrators and guidance counselors is so that they will recognize if a student has a higher linguistic level, has a higher social level than they do a cognitive level, because the social level can oftentimes mask what they can do pencil to paper. And so we always have to make sure that we're going back and we're constantly assessing to make sure that those two things are working in lockstep together. BICS, of course, your social skills are going to develop much faster than your cognitive skills, but that's where we as classroom teachers have to go in and mitigate to make sure that those two things are at least semi-working in lockstep together. Differentiation of instruction is so important. When we talk about differentiation of instruction, we're looking at several things. You have to use multiple modalities, multiple things when you are teaching your ELLs. You can't just be one note because every ELL that you have in that classroom, even if it's a Spanish speaker, and this is one thing that I always have to teach my students at the beginning of every single semester. It seems like that every semester I have the same issue. Not all of our Spanish speaking students come from Mexico and Central America. And it's really important that, and not only that, but the Spanish that they're speaking in those different countries is not always the same, as we all know. And so you cannot be one note. You cannot assume because a student is from El Salvador or a student is from Mexico, that when you're using a certain set of vocabulary with them, that it's going to necessarily translate culturally or linguistically for them to be able to understand what you're saying. And so that's why it's so important that you go back and you give them multiple ways, because the way that a student may have learned how to do a math problem in Turkey, for example, may be completely different than how you're teaching them how to do the same math problem using the Florida standards or using standards in another state in the United States. So you've got to give your ELLs, whatever level of English that they speak, you've got to be able to give them the ability to demonstrate their knowledge in a multitude of different ways. And what you as the classroom educator are doing is you are always building and scaffolding that instruction. I like to analogize it to building a building. So when you're building a large building, you start on the ground level, on la planta baja, no? And then, so what you're doing is you put a scaffold there, and when you go to the primer piso, you put another scaffold. When you go to the segundo piso, you put another scaffold. And so eventually you've got enough scaffolding to where the building is complete. And that, as a classroom teacher, is what you are attempting to do with your ELLs. You're also teaching across the curriculum. And one of the things that we emphasize when you're teaching the curriculum to your students is you can't teach above where an ELL's language level is at the moment, and you can't teach below it. You have to meet an ELL exactly where they are at their moment of learning. If you teach above or below, that affective filter that we talked about earlier is going to go up, and students are not going to want to go on that journey with you because they don't feel confident in their ability. They feel like, oh, well, this is very below me. I did this, you know, last year. I can do much better than this, but she or he doesn't have confidence in me. Or if you're teaching above, I don't understand this. I'll never understand this, but I'm just going to have to pretend that I do. So we want to make sure that we meet our ELLs where they are. Another thing that I emphasize in terms of best practices to my teacher candidates is you always need to, when you're working with your ELLs, you always need to increase wait time, because they're processing from the native language into English, and a lot of times back into the native language, so that they understand what it is that you're asking them to do on a particular assignment or an activity, or what it is that you're saying in class. You also have to make sure that you are measured in the cadence of your voice. Don't ever speak too quickly, and don't speak too slowly. Just have a very nice metered tone to your voice, and don't be pitchy, and try as best you can. I don't know if you can hear it in my voice, but I have a very Southern accent, being from the state of Tennessee. And that's something that I have to practice when I'm working with my students, is to make sure that the cadence that I'm using is as free of an accent as it can possibly be. The other thing is to make sure that you're moderating your hand movements, your gestures, your body language, and your facial expressions. Because what may be a positive hand sign or facial expression in one culture may be something completely different in another culture. For example, if a student doesn't make eye contact with you and you're attempting to correct their behavior in class, well, as obviously teachers in the United States, we see that as a sign of disrespect. But in other cultures, that is a sign of extreme respect. And so that's why it's so important, as I said at the beginning, that you need to know your students' cultural backgrounds, and so that when you are managing your classroom and you're engaged in direct instruction, that if a student responds to you in a way that you think is not, you know, the appropriate response, it may not be defiance, it may just be something that is related to their particular culture. And the other thing that we really emphasize when working with our ELLs is not to suppress their native language. Always, at some point, not just to incorporate and have a multicultural classroom and have items, reading items, technologies, personalized little areas for students that really reflect their culture, but to also incorporate their native language. We never want to suppress that. So if a student chooses to answer you in Spanish and it's the correct answer, that's perfectly fine. So what you do on the back end is you let them answer and you support their learning and you say, that's great. Now, how do you say it? ¿Cómo se dice en inglés? How do you say it in English? Okay. So you never want to go in and repress the native language. You work in tandem with it so that they're cognitively developing and they will develop English alongside that as well. Let's talk a little about assistive. Oh, Karlans, I want to stop just a second and see if there's any questions.
Yes, Dr. Blankenship. Here we have one, I think it has to do with the effective filters and obviously making the students feel safe in order to learn the language. How can we train our teachers to be focused on the nonverbal cues that can come from having interaction with the students, and the importance that carries in understanding the life and the background of the students?
That's a really great question. That's one of the reasons that it is really important if you have guidance counselors in your school or even working with your school administrators, that when what they do in our school districts is at the beginning of every year, they send us, before we even see our students, they send us a list of our students, and they will note which students are English language learners and whether they're born in the United States or external thereto. And what we do is we get with our guidance counselors and administrators, and we say, okay, let's do a deeper dive into this student's particular culture. And a lot of times what we'll do is we'll reach out to, a lot of times our students tend to live in more isolated communities, of their particular culture. And a lot of times what we'll do is we'll reach out to a leader in that community and say, can you partner with us and give us an idea of, if a student is doing this in the class, what classroom, if they're doing this particular gesture or they're behaving in this particular way, what does that mean? Rather than, because what we're trying to do is get away from a punitive approach when we're working with our students. We want to be as positive as possible. And so if a student is exhibiting a particular behavior or not responding to you in the way that you would think appropriate, then what we would do on our end is do a deeper cultural dive to say, oh, okay, this is the reason that the student is responding this way. Alert our teachers to, this is what this looks like in your classroom, and here is how you can make adjustments to that. We also have a lot of community volunteers that come into our schools. And so you may have a paraprofessional or just a community volunteer that comes in from that student's particular culture, and they can help you real time in the classroom. That's another great resource to have. So we have, grandmothers that come in that, are retired, and they come in and work with our teachers, particularly in the elementary schools during the day. We have business leaders that will come in from their jobs, and they'll work with our classroom teachers to help them understand, culturally what's going on with the students. So that there are several different ways to get at it. But one of the most important things to remember is to always communicate. You're not communicating and not trying to get a deeper understanding of what is going on with a particular student is only going to cause that student to regress. And so the more that you can demonstrate that you have an understanding, even taking the student off to the side and, talking to the student one-on-one, if their English level is to where you can do that, and say, give me an idea of what's going on with you. That goes a long way than just being completely punitive and, shutting a student out because they're behaving in a way that isn't what you would anticipate. Just real briefly about assistive technologies. As we have seen since COVID has happened, technology seems to rule us even more today. I am a big advocate, and a lot of my research deals with technology and the use of technology in classes, but I always tell a cautionary tale. Technology is not a silver, it is not the end all and be all of fixing all of the problems and making all of the modifications and accommodations that you need to when you're working with an ELL. And the reason for that is because it's not a live person. Yes, there's an algorithm that runs Google Translate and Babbel and Rosetta Stone, all of those very popular programs that we tend to use as classroom teachers to translate from English into another language. But that algorithm is only looking for commonalities in language. It's not a live person. It can't see a facial expression. It can't see body language. It can't see how a student is writing. It can't see how a student is responding to a question in class. For a quick fix, yes, it will work. But I always like to tell the cautionary tale. Technology has its place, but it is no substitute for a live teacher in the classroom. Some other best practices that we can look at. Always give a variety of different types of directions, verbal, visual, whether you're translating it or you act it out for a student. This is another big thing we always discourage. Do not overcorrect an ELL. Let them make mistakes. They need to make mistakes. If you're constantly correcting, then when they go to do an assessment or an activity for you, they're going to expect you to be there to correct them. And that's what we want to get away from. Let them take a risk, let them make a mistake, and then work with them so that they understand where that error is and they'll catch it the next time. We call that positive versus negative washback. When you're giving feedback on an assessment or an activity a student has done, if you give it in a positive way, it's going to cause them to cognitively grow, and that affective filter will lower. But if you give it in a negative way and you use that proverbial red pen and you're marking everything up, then that's considered negative washback, and that's going to cause the student to regress. As I noted earlier, it's very important to always pre-teach vocabulary and to always contextualize what it is you're teaching. You may be using vocabulary in a math lesson that's the same vocabulary you would be using in a science lesson, but in the science lesson, it means something different. And so to make sure that the ELL is understanding the content, you've got to go back and say, in math, this is what this word means, but in science, this is what this word means. Always model activities and repeat. You can never repeat yourself enough when you're working with an ELL. We always like to do the example of, I do it, I'm gonna demonstrate to you how to do this activity or assessment, then we're gonna do it together, and you can do it in a small group of ELLs. You can work with an ELL one-on-one, or you can work in a mixed group of ELLs and non-ELLs. And then after I do it and we do it together, then I want you to do it on your own. And then you just repeat this pattern until you have the comfort level that the ELL understands what it is that you're wanting them to get from the lesson. You note that there's a little thing here called Kagan strategies. I'm not sure I put it in the resources, but his name is Stephen Kagan. And if you do a Google search on him, he has a lot of cooperative learning strategies that you can use when you're working with your ELLs and non-ELLs. Always check for understanding. Don't always assume that the best assessment is a summative assessment, where you're giving a pencil paper-based test or test on a computer, ABCD, true, false, short answer. There are all sorts of ways that you can holistically assess an ELL, and they can demonstrate their knowledge to you without simply putting it in what we consider to be a standard test type format. And positive social interactions. Again, we always want to make sure that you are being, the three things I always tell my early classroom teachers, that my mantra in class when I was a teacher: be fair, be firm, and be consistent. Those are the three things that will, when you are working with English language learners and non-ELLs, those are three things that will develop a classroom of respect, a classroom of rapport, and a classroom where where students are positively learning and you're positively engaging. And one of the things that that talked about earlier, being culturally sensitive, you must check your biases. We all think that when we go into the classroom that we are non-biased, and that is certainly something that we all have biases, whether they are subconscious or they're conscious. And it is very important when you're working, particularly with ELLs, that you check your biases before. And you may have biases that are intercultural, and between cultures. You may also have biases that are intracultural, biases that you may not be aware of that you have within your own culture. So it's always important to be a reflective practitioner and to go back and say, is the reason that my student is responding to me the way that he or she is because they're not understanding, or is it more of a cultural issue? Is there some sort of bias that I am imposing on that particular student that I'm not even aware of? Have another classroom teacher come in and work with you. Hey, can you come and observe me work with this ELL? You had him last year. You had her last year. You seem to get along really well with that student. Why am I having such a problem? Can you come in and observe me? Always reach out to your colleagues, reach out to your administrators, because they can be very helpful in seeing things that you may not see because you're too close to the classroom situation and working with the student. Karlans, any questions?
Yes. Yes, doctor. Here we have one referring to use of native language in the classroom. Wakidia asked whether we are allowing students to use, if we allow them to use their native language, if we necessarily are promoting translation to be used in the classroom. If that will be the case, if we promote the use of native language.
Yeah, not necessarily, no. What we are shying away from is obviously you don't want to do side-by-side translation all the time. Translation has its place, but it does not get at deeper cognitive learning. You don't want them to totally rely on answering you in the native language all of the time. That's the reason that I noted earlier that it's okay when you're doing an activity the first time if they answer you in the native language and they answer you correctly. That's where the I do, we do, you do comes in. So you go back and say, okay, you answered it correctly. So now we're going to sit together and we're going to answer it in English. And then the next time that you do the activity, I anticipate that you'll be able to answer it in English and not in the native language. I tend to, teachers tend to rely so much on just direct translation because that's the easiest thing to do. A lot of times direct translation doesn't translate the way that you think it is. And so you may, even if you have ELLs in the classroom that speak the same language as higher ELLs that speak the same language as a lower ELL, that's another situation that you don't want the lower ELL speaker to get into with the higher ELLs, where they're totally relying on them to translate everything for them that you say. And so that's where you have to do a lot of differentiated instruction and a lot of different grouping among your students so that they're working with a group of non-ELLs. And then everybody in the group has an assignment. That way the ELL can't hide in the group and say, oh, I don't understand what's going on. I'll get my friend who's a higher ELL to explain it to me. Now they have to do it themselves and they have to do it in English as opposed to just answering in the native language. So yes, we want to support them in showing that they can do something in their native language, but at some point they've got to make that transition into being able to demonstrate that they can do it in the English language as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Blankenship. One last question we have here. How can Dominican institutions reach out to you if they're interested in learning more about best practices or training opportunities with FAMU? Absolutely.
Let me, I'm going to go past these next two slides. If you see this webinar on YouTube, you can look at these separately. These are just the standards. We call them can-do standards that we use in the state because we look at what a student can do in English as opposed to what they cannot do. So we've changed our approach to how we teach. And you see that we are part of a larger consortium of states, territories, and Indian education reservations that use these standards. So they cross state lines. So go ahead and go past these. You can look at these standards at your leisure. And let's get into what we could offer you as university faculty through FAMU. We're looking at, and you can reach out to me. My contact information will be at the end of this presentation. And then I'll work with a team of very dedicated professionals at FAMU who want to work with our faculty, university faculty in the Dominican Republic on these particular initiatives. And so after this webinar is concluded, you may reach out to me individually, and then what I will do is loop in the team that I work with so that we can address your needs and partner with you as appropriate. So one option is to offer you an institutional course designed specifically to meet the needs of your particular faculty and staff. This would be a course that I would design working with our Office of Instructional Technology and Canvas. And there would be a combination of asynchronous and synchronous activities that we would do together based on what your professional development needs. At the end, you would receive digital badges that you can carry with you in an electronic portfolio and a certificate of completion. Another option is we can do, if you have university faculty that are in need of enhancing their English language skills, we can offer you also personalized or team tutoring through our tutors in the College of Education. And we can do that virtually via Zoom or Canvas. And the purpose of that is to increase your scores on the TOEFL or the IELTS, should you be interested in enrolling in any of our graduate programs at FAMU. So that is what that is designed to do. And again, you would receive a certificate of completion and digital badges at the end. So our programs moving forward, coming in the spring of 2021, We offer a completely online master's in curriculum and instruction, and I'm happy to announce that in the spring there will be a TESOL component to that. So we are very excited about that. If you enroll in the curriculum and instruction program, you would take all of the courses that are involved in curriculum and instruction, and then 15 hours that are specifically dedicated to teaching English, the methodologies of teaching English as a second official language. And of course, at the conclusion of that, you would receive a master's degree with an emphasis in teaching, emphasis in TESOL. We are also looking, I think I might have done that backwards. I did that backwards this moment. Sorry about that. Professional teaching certification, that's the one thing that we're going to be offering. So if you're not interested in doing the master's degree program and going that route, these are the same courses that are actually in the master's, that will be in the master's curriculum for the TESOL certification or the TESOL track. The difference here is this is just a separate teaching certification. It wouldn't have a degree attached to it. This is the master's in curriculum and instruction, and this is what would actually have the master's degree attached to it with an emphasis, a track in teaching a TESOL. And you see there are 5 courses that are involved: methods, curriculum design, applied linguistics, teaching English grammar, syntax, and assessment and ELLs. And I would like to point out, just in case you're wondering about the quality of programming that we offer in ESOL at Florida A&M. Last year, among all of the state colleges and universities throughout the state of Florida that have ESOL endorsement programs, Florida A&M was ranked, our students and our program was ranked #1 among all of those programs in elementary education with offering ESOL endorsement. And so if you have any concerns about our programming, you can rest assured that you are coming to the #1 program in the state of Florida. And that concludes my presentation. That was a little bit some additional resources for you to consider. This is just a brief list, but if you want to go ahead, if you're looking particularly for resources to work through the COVID situation, these professional organizations and in the United States, they have just a complete side of their websites that are dedicated to COVID. One of them is the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages. Coloring Colorado, I absolutely love this website. I use it all of the time, and they have done a fabulous job in providing COVID-related resources, particularly working virtually with ELLs. The Defense Language Institute also offers a lot of resources for professional development and training for teaching English as a second language. TESOL International is another institution, and of course, I just briefly talked about WIDA. WIDA has an abundance of resources for you for professional development, in addition to dealing with the current COVID crisis. And my contact information, the best way to contact me is via my email. It's very simple. It's my first name, Rebecca.Blankenship @FAMU, which is Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University.edu. And after this presentation, you are welcome to reach out to me for continued support. If you would like to partner with us in any way, I will get our team together and we will look at what you are specifically requesting, and we will move forward from there. And that is the conclusion of my presentation, and I certainly appreciate your attention today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rebecca Blankenship, for being with us today. It's been an honor. It's a great presentation for the participants. Thank you very much for being with us today. You will be receiving an email with a survey. Please make sure to fill that out and give us feedback so we can have better sessions every time that you join us. So thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. Dr. Blankenship, thank you very much. And thank you, everybody else, for being here today. So thank you. Bye.